My sister kicked me out of our parents' house, where I was paying rent, leaving my daughter on her own outside. But now my parents need help with the mortgage. I'm 33 and a single mom to a 5-year-old daughter. I separated from my husband after giving birth because he cheated on me during my pregnancy. But that's another story, so I'll share it in a later post. I cut him out of my life and went to live with my parents. 2 days ago, I got home from work and found my younger sister, Eva, 29, sitting there with her belly all out. She had moved to Croatia with her husband after getting married. I was secretly relieved because she'd always been nothing but mean to me. She never liked me for no particular reason, she just always thought she was better than me. She even manipulated our parents against me. Being the youngest, she always got her way with her antics. Even though she's younger, she's big and strong, while I'm small and skinny. If she grabbed my wrist, there'd be no way to break free. Anyone watching us would say I'd never stand a chance in a physical fight with her. Still, my parents never believed me when I complained that she'd hit me. They'd say, "She's your little sister. How could she hit you?" So I kept my distance, only talking to her when absolutely necessary. Thankfully, I eventually got the chance to move out for high school, and it was a huge relief. Now, that monster is back in my life. When I saw her pregnant, I assumed she was here for her postpartum period. I asked Mom how long she was planning to stay. Eva heard me and shouted from the living room, "I'm here to stay. Got a problem with that?" God, she hasn't changed one bit. Still the same narcissist. Mom told me that Eva's husband had been transferred back to the United States. His company provided him with housing, but since Eva is pregnant, they figured living with our parents was best for her. They could take care of her during the pregnancy and after the baby is born. I asked Mom if she'd have time to take care of her daughter. She hesitantly replied, "Yes, I have to do it. Eva's still so young. How could she raise her child on her own? She needs help." I was speechless. Really? Eva is 29 and can't raise her child on her own? I was 27 when I had my son. I handled the postpartum period alone because my husband was busy and my mom barely visited. She only showed up 2 or 3 times, and only once after I gave birth. She said I should learn how to raise a child because it's part of motherhood. Now, when her favorite daughter is pregnant, she's ready to turn into her babysitter. How hypocritical. Her favoritism has always been obvious, and that's why I've kept my distance. When I split from my husband, I rented a house and didn't go live with my parents, but Dad insisted I live with them. He said his house was too big for just the 2 of us and that they'd be around to watch my daughter when I went to work, or so he said. Instead of paying rent for a separate house, I could live with them and pay them rent. It seemed like a fair deal. Plus, I was going through so much emotional turmoil, pregnancy, postpartum, a cheating husband, divorce, that when Dad offered support, I rushed to accept it. So I moved in with them. I didn't have any problems living with them, except the promised support for taking care of my daughter never materialized. Mom only agreed to watch her a few times. Most of the time, I had to call a babysitter. She said she couldn't take care of her full-time, so I should hire a babysitter while she supervised to make sure everything was okay. Like she wanted to be the baby monitor. I found it funny because I thought it was better to have Mom around than leave my daughter with a stranger. So I ended up hiring a full-time babysitter, too. It's so disheartening to see Mom fussing over my sister, providing her with food, medicine, and supplements. She never did that for me during my 9 months of pregnancy. She barely visited, and then only once after I gave birth. Ever since I found out Eva was going to stay here, I've had a feeling she's up to something. I mean, how could they agree to let Eva move in permanently? Our house isn't that big. I'm okay with moving in, but my daughter is too young to be left unsupervised. Even though Mom isn't exclusively taking care of her, I feel safer having her around. If I move, I'd always have to hire a babysitter, and besides, I'm not sure how safe it is to leave a child with one. I know I can be overprotective, but as a single mom, my daughter is the only hope in my life. I know I tend to be overprotective, but what am I supposed to do? She is my everything. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe. New stories every day. Update 1. Thanks for all the advice. It helped me calm down a bit. My worst fear came true just 2 days after I posted. I got home from work to find my things packed up and placed on the front porch, with my daughter sitting right next to them. I asked who did it, and she said that Grandma had packed everything and made her sit there. The babysitter was gone, and now Mom was supposed to watch her for a few hours until I got back. My daughter is a quiet, well-behaved little girl. Poor thing had been sitting there for hours, waiting for me. I asked where Grandpa and Grandma were, but she said nothing. She just hugged me and said she'd been waiting for me because she was so scared of Aunt Eva. I asked if Eva had hurt her or yelled at her, and she started to cry, saying that Aunt was shouting something she couldn't understand and, with the way she was smashing all my belongings, my daughter felt threatened. I stormed into my room, yelling at Eva for an explanation. She said, "You want to mess with a pregnant woman? Think I can call the cops for harassing me? You know I can, right?" I shot back that I could call the police for harassing my daughter in my absence. She laughed and said, "Got any evidence? Mom was here when I packed your stuff. You know which side Mom's on, don't you?" With that, I realized talking to her was useless. I called Mom, but she didn't answer. I knew she was home, but she had locked herself in her room. Eva's wicked laugh made it clear that everyone was against me. She mocked my powerlessness, saying, "Take a hint, idiot. Nobody wants you here. We packed up for you and made it easier, can't you see? I'm pregnant and need space. My son and I are staying here now, so get out." I told her, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not living here for free like you. I pay rent." Before I could say any more, she started yelling at me just like she did when we were kids. "Pay rent? Got a receipt or a lease?" "No, of course not. How long are you gonna be a freeloader sucking my parents' money? You're so useless. That's why your husband found peace in someone else's bed, because you're useless. Get out now if you don't want me to beat you in front of your daughter." My daughter ran over and hugged me, petrified by all the yelling and chaos. So, I loaded my car with my belongings and left with her. There was nothing left to discuss. My parents were weak in the face of her. She wasn't lying when she said Mom was there. She did the packing. In fact, Mom and Dad would have had to help pack my things. Eva is 7 months pregnant, and there's no way she could have lifted or dragged my heavy closet and suitcases on her own without their help. They're all in this together. Her husband has a decent job, and they can easily afford their own place. Yet she came after me and kicked me out. She's determined to make my life miserable. She left her husband to live alone in the company apartment while she stays behind to cause trouble. I don't know what I did wrong. I checked into a hotel for a week and started looking for a place to live. It was incredibly hard to juggle work and house hunting. Finding a home in 1 week is impossible. Luckily, one of my coworkers was looking for a roommate, so I asked if I could move in with her. Nobody wants a roommate with a baby, but I assured her that my daughter wouldn't be a bother and that I'd leave as soon as I found a place. She was kind enough to let me stay. I've been living with her for 2 weeks now. I found a place within my budget and within a reasonable distance from work and my daughter's daycare, but the current tenant won't move out for another month. I've already made the reservations, I'm just waiting for it to be vacant. It's been almost 3 weeks since I was, well, kicked out of the house. My daughter still trembles with fear, thinking that Aunt Eva will come to get us and hurt us. My poor girl can't exactly explain what Eva did to her, but she cries because Aunt was just yelling at her, staring with wide, threatening eyes, and threatening to hit her. She still cries and sometimes wets the bed. I don't know how to make her forget that day. I feel so helpless watching her get upset remembering it. I still can't understand how insecure my daughter must have felt that day. I don't understand how my sister can be a mother if she treats kids like this. I feel sorry for her future son. Update 2. As I mentioned, I'd been paying rent to live in my parents' house for the past year. Dad asked me to pay an extra $5,000 on top of the rent, promising to pay me back later. I agreed to help him out. I had no idea he was using my rent money plus that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage. Now that I've moved out, I didn't pay any rent. On the 10th of this month, Dad called me in a panic, yelling, "Why haven't you transferred the money yet?" The bank just sent a message saying the automatic debit failed due to insufficient funds. I couldn't help but laugh. He was so sure I'd pay rent even after moving out that he hadn't even checked his account balance or set aside an emergency fund. I told him, "Hey, I don't live in your house anymore. Your golden daughter kicked me out, remember? So why should I pay rent?" He went silent for a moment and then said, "How am I supposed to pay the mortgage? I'm not earning enough. Sales at my store have dropped. The little money I do make goes toward household expenses. I was using your rent money and that extra $5,000 to cover the mortgage." I replied, "That's not my problem. I don't owe you anything. I paid for my stay and bought my own food. Ask your narcissistic daughter to help you out. I'm sure she will." I hung up the phone. About an hour later, I got a call from Mom. She said, "Your dad is struggling to pay the mortgage and instead of helping him, you hang up on him. You forgot how we supported you when your loser husband left you. This is how you repay us. Swallow your pride and transfer the money you've been sending every month." I answered, "You can barely listen to yourself. You let me live in your house because I paid rent, and you used that to pay the mortgage. I hired a babysitter every time I needed help. You didn't help at all. What kind of support are you talking about?" I realized I wasn't going to stay quiet and take it like I did when I was a kid. Now I know how to stand up for myself. She finally calmed down and said, "Sweetheart, Eva is pregnant and needs more space. That's why she asked you to move out temporarily. There's nothing to be bitter about." I replied, "She didn't ask me to move. She kicked me out while you both chose to turn a blind eye and keep quiet. She tormented my daughter, and I'll never forgive you for that." Then she tried to defend her spoiled daughter, saying, "She's just a little immature. You shouldn't take her words to heart. You're the older, wiser one. Be mature, forgive her, and send us the money." I laughed and said, "I'm not your weak doormat you could push around. You always favored her over me, and by letting her bully my daughter, you've crossed every line of sanity. I never wanted to live with you guys, but I stayed because I was afraid of leaving my daughter alone with a babysitter. Now, my daughter feels more threatened by you than by any stranger." My mom started to cry and apologize, but I interrupted her. "I'm tired of being manipulated by crocodile tears. I'm not giving you another dime, and stop bothering me." They sent me a few more messages asking me to keep paying, but I didn't respond. They haven't called since. It's been almost a month now. I guess they're handling the mortgage on their own, or maybe your golden daughter is helping you out with that. I really don't care what's going on in your lives. I'm happy now in my small, cozy home with my daughter. I've hired a babysitter who takes care of her after school. The babysitter is a middle-aged woman who has a son 5 years older than my daughter. She brings her son over so they can play together, and they have a great time. It's so wonderful to come home to a happy, loving daughter. Life is getting better. We just have to hang in there. Update 3. Hi everyone. First of all, thank you for all the love and support. It means so much to me. And secondly, I'm sorry I haven't updated this thread more often. There are 2 reasons for that. 1. I didn't have any major updates to share since I cut all ties with my parents and my narcissistic sister. 2. I've been so busy with life. Work has ramped up because I got promoted, which is great, but that comes with extra responsibilities and, of course, a pay raise. So I've been busy with work and my duties as a mom. But this time I do have an interesting update. Last week, Mom and Dad showed up at my workplace. They didn't know where I lived, so they came straight to my job. I told the security staff to ask them to leave because I was too busy to meet with anyone. I could see from the window blinds that they were arguing with security and refusing to leave. They looked frail, like they had aged at least 10 years in just 1 year. Mom was even carrying a baby. I assumed it was Eva's child. I got curious, so I went out to meet them. They started crying when they saw me. They came to me as their last hope to save the house. Dad said he hadn't been able to pay the mortgage for the last 7 or 8 months. He used up all their savings to cover the first 2 or 3 months after I left. The bank had given them enough time to pay the money back, but they still fell behind. Last month, the bank foreclosed on the house and put it up for sale. They've been living in a shabby apartment ever since. They came to me asking for help to save the house. I listened patiently and then asked why their spoiled daughter wasn't helping them. They looked down and said that her husband kicked her out because he caught her cheating on him, and even the baby wasn't his. All those stories about moving and the company housing were lies. Her husband is still in Croatia, and the divorce is in process. I was stunned when I heard that. Mom cried and said we didn't know about any of this. She hadn't told us. She claimed she was there for the birth, but after you moved out and we asked for help with the mortgage, the truth came out. I was thinking, what did you do once you learned the truth? Clearly, you supported her, which is why you have that baby in your arms. They were like, how could we leave her in that condition? She had nowhere to go. We exhausted all our savings to pay her medical bills. Their situation really seemed pathetic. I fell silent, trying to figure out what to do. Without thinking, I asked, "Where's Eva?" Mom was mumbling something, but Dad shot her a look and said she was at home, refusing to go to work. Mom interrupted and said, "How could she leave such a tiny baby and go to work?" I laughed and said, "Really, Mom? You're still supporting her? Her baby must be about 7 or 8 months old. Women all over the world go back to work leaving a 6-month-old at home. Eva is no different. And given her situation, she should have found a job long ago." Then they pleaded for help. I told them I didn't have enough money to save their house. Dad said if he could pay the overdue months, he could ask the bank manager to stop the house sale, and then they could continue making the remaining monthly payments. I said I didn't have that kind of money. I've used my savings to pay the deposit on my rental home and cover my daughter's elementary school tuition. Mom made some gestures when she heard my answer. I said, "Mom, instead of making gestures, try to understand that I'm a single mom who takes care of myself and my daughter on my own." After they left, I felt really depressed. My boss noticed I was absent-minded at my desk for over an hour. I talked to her about it, and she gave me an idea. I called Dad and told him I was ready to pay the accumulated mortgage arrears as well as the remaining payments, but he had to transfer the house into my name first. My boss suggested I buy that house with my promotion and salary increase. I should be able to pay the mortgage since I've been helping out with it for so many years and now I'd be helping to save the house. It seemed like a fair deal for them. In exchange, they could live in that house, but without their daughter, without the shame. Dad went silent and said he'd discuss it with Mom and get back to me. I said, "Take your time, I'm not sure if you even have enough." It's been a week since then, but they haven't called back. That's their way of saying they're not on board with my proposal. They're okay with seeing their house sold and living in a gloomy apartment, as long as they can keep their spoiled daughter and live comfortably. Well, good for them, their choices are theirs, and now they'll have to live with them. Today, on my way home from work, I even considered stopping by my parents' house to see if the "for sale" sign was up, but then I dismissed the idea. I cut them out of my life a year ago, and I'm going to keep it that way. I don't want them back in my life. I'm happy and content living with my daughter and watching her grow and reach new milestones. Now she's in elementary school, and I couldn't be prouder. Update 4. Many people in my previous post gave me some interesting advice, so I'm back a few months later to share an update. They suggested that I buy the house, not for my parents, but for me, and that's exactly what I did. It wasn't easy because even though I had been contributing money toward the mortgage, nothing was actually in my name. I spoke with a lawyer who told me that in this state there's a way to file a court order that lets me assume the debt if I pay the overdue amounts. I just had to present proof of my contributions, which I did using some messages I received when I stopped paying. Since I was renting at the time, it seemed like a great idea to finally have my own home with my daughter. So we went through all the bureaucracy, and a couple of weeks ago we moved back into my parents' house, which is now mine. Now, instead of paying rent, I'm dealing with a mortgage, which is a bit more expensive, but I think it's worth it. My daughter loved the idea of going back since we'd lived there for so long, and that was a good thing. Now I just have to redecorate, which is a big expense, so I'll take it slowly. I'll start with her room, decorating it together, and then move on to the rest of the house. If any new developments come up in my story, I'll be sure to share them. Update 5. Many of you mentioned that in my first post I said I'd talk about my ex, so I'm going to take this update to do just that. Honestly, there isn't much mystery to it, but a promise is a promise. Basically, I caught my husband in bed with a coworker, something he'd been doing for a while. I was pregnant and feeling a bit off that day, so my boss let me leave a little early, and well, I found them in the act. I was still pregnant and had nowhere else to go, so I ended up staying in the house, sleeping in another room until I had my daughter. After that, I moved into an apartment and got a divorce. He refused to take responsibility for my daughter and simply left with his coworker. I never heard from him again, as his parents had passed away and he lost touch with the rest of his family. So it's not some big scandal of infidelity like many might have expected. Maybe I made it seem more mysterious at first when I mentioned it, but I only did that because I didn't want to distract from the main issue. Update 6. I had this wild idea that I dismissed because it sounded so funny if it ever happened, and it did. When I moved out and the "for sale" sign was taken down, I thought my parents might find out their house was sold and come pounding on my door. They didn't know who bought it, but they found out when I opened the door on Saturday afternoon. There they were, both of my parents, standing with expressions that are hard to describe. I wish I'd known they were coming, or had set up cameras to capture their reactions. They asked what I was doing there, and I explained everything, while still keeping them from coming in, just standing in the doorway. They couldn't believe it at first. They were so shocked they barely could form words, like they'd short-circuited or something. But when it finally all clicked for them, they started asking if I'd bought it for them, which honestly made me laugh. I've mentioned before that my parents' comments always crack me up because of their creative ideas. Next, they demanded that I give it back to them, but I explained that the deed and the mortgage are now in my name, so the house belongs to me and my daughter. Of course, they tried to argue about it, but I told them to leave because I wasn't interested in debating, or else I'd call the police. So they turned around and left, probably not too happy about it. That's about it. I know a lot of people will tell me to install cameras and all that, because I've read similar stories on Reddit, and I'm thinking about it. But unless they come back, I don't think I'll update on that again. Update 7. This is just a mini update, there's not much to report, but I promised to keep you in the loop if anything happened. And while it isn't much, it's worth mentioning. My sister came by, though this time she already knew everything, so I didn't get to see that look of surprise on her face. I'm a bit jealous of my parents for getting to see it when someone told them. In any case, she demanded that she be allowed to stay in the house with my parents. I simply said no, and reminded her of how she treated my daughter the last time I saw her. She tried to play the pity card for what happened to her, but I told her that she was the one who cheated, and I wasn't going to feel sorry for her. After all, I was the one who got deceived. I then said the same thing to my parents, and she left too. Honestly, I don't have the energy or time to answer all their questions every time they come pounding on my door. If this keeps happening, I might have to look into a restraining order or something like that. Considering what my sister did to my daughter, I think that'd be the right thing to do. What do you all think?